Hello audience, I'm Zach the Dark Conservatarian and I'm here with a quick video to just wish you all a very Merry Christmas. Christmas, a time of joy, giving, and family. A time of cold weather, colorful lights in the dark, and spiked eggnog. A rather arbitrary time, we've chosen to either celebrate the birth of a man whose race had been retconned multiple times, just overly indulge on capitalism, or most of the time, do both.
So how on God's green earth can you be a Christian and capitalist? What you guys are going to be seeing here is going to be an interesting conversation between Sargon of Akkad and Steven Crowder.
So I had come across this video from Progressive Voice almost a year ago, and from the get-go, got the idea to make a response video to this, as he goes responding to a clip on Steven Crowder's YouTube channel where Steve and Sargon go talking about whether Jesus was a communist or not, and it was the same clip that I had highlighted almost 3 years ago, except obviously from a different perspective. So I knew this was gonna be a riot. But I'm not here to defend Steven Crowder per se, especially ever since the whole Cower with Crowder incident made me disappointed in him, and that might be a topic for another time, but instead I'm here to attack the claim from Sahil of Jesus being a communist, supposedly. Well, Sahil doesn't technically call him a communist, but he calls him anti-capitalist, which you could go to the logical conclusion that Sahil is ultimately calling Jesus a communist or socialist, but that's beside the point. Let's get right into this. One more response video before the year is done.
Now, Steven Crowder is legitimately the least Christian on planet Earth. He doesn't care about the poor. He doesn't care about refugees. He doesn't care about any of that stuff. He's entirely lacking empathy.
Blah, blah, blah. Unless you are going to back up the claims of him having no empathy and not caring for the poor, enough of the smears and get on to the point.
What Sargon is going to bring up is that he would imagine that people who are all Christians would be Bernie supporters, because the teachings of Jesus was, and we'll get into some of those verses, and he'll get into some of those as well, was, helping the poor, caring about refugees, etc., etc. So they're going to get into a little bit of a back and forth here. It just seemed like Steven Crowder is being kind of weaselly, being semantic, sort of changing up these semantics.
No, it's not semantical at all, really. Because when we capitalists get concerned over communism, it's over the advocacy of state policies that institute communism. If you want to get semantical yourself and say or imply that Jesus was really just communistic by philosophy, or was an anarcho-communist, you might have a fair point there. Nothing under capitalism is preventing people from voluntarily setting up their own communes, but it's the state action over the economy that we're concerned with, and we're saying Jesus doesn't advocate for when we say he's not a communist. And here's the thing, Bernie Sanders and Christians being Sanders supporters was what was brought up in connection to Jesus' alleged communism in this discussion here between Steve and Sargon. And guess what? Bernie is not an anarcho-communist. He's a state socialist, or social democrat if you want to get more semantical, in that he believes that the state should be pushing the economy to be more socialist. So the government control aspect of this is important and is not really semantical at all.
Sargon brings up saying, hey, I would think that pretty much all Christians would be Bernie supporters because Jesus's espoused beliefs were the closest to the beliefs of Bernie Sanders and his policy positions. And Steven Crowder goes, well, hold on, but why would you say that? And Sargon brings up a very important verse. It's Mark 10:25. It says, "It is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for someone who is rich to enter the kingdom of God." So I don't understand how anyone's interpretation of this statement can mean anything but it's basically impossible to get into heaven if you are rich.
I mean, it's just exactly that, Sahil. I mean, that doesn't mean that people have to morally dictate other people on their wealth. Jesus wasn't saying that. And also, I want to add that rich people are not required for capitalism and free markets to be prevalent in a society. Rich people are just a product of capitalism. They're not a requirement of capitalism.
An argument that is made later on by Steven Crowder is that, it was never something that was forced. It was always something that was voluntary.
Well, technically, he actually described it as something being advice for the rich.
It's concern for the poor and the downtrodden, and the advice to the rich is to give your wealth away and go and do good.
Key advice there, right? What did you just say? The what for the rich? The advice for the rich. There was never an advocation of a system of government on forcing the rich.
And I will go forth and admit that, yeah, Steve was wrong in this part right here. It's not really advice. It is basically a command by Jesus to donate to other people.
But is that really something that's voluntary, though? Like, can you even consider anything in this context voluntary, considering the fact that, yeah, okay, it's voluntary if you choose not to do it, but what's the repercussion for not doing it? Burning in hell for however much time. I don't know how long.
I'm no pastor or anything like that, so I might not be the best person to try and describe this, but best way that I can describe this is that your morality based off of Christianity and your relationship with God is between you and God. And speaking of context, like you mentioned a little bit earlier, the context of this is whether or not that they should be forced to donate their wealth to other people. And as far as a person's salvation or damnation goes, with a person like going to hell, that isn't necessarily God directly sending a person to hell. That's more like a person falling on their own sword in the way of them not accepting Jesus as their savior or following God's command. Another thing here to add is that whether or not you donate enough to other people is not the end-all be-all of whether or not you get saved into heaven or not.
And so, you know, when they're, you know, he talks about how that's not really necessarily legitimate, that, you know, oh, you know, Christians give a lot of money away. Like, yeah, okay, so what? Rockefeller gave a ton of money away, and his workers were horribly paid.
That's not a rebuttal at all to what he was trying to say there. He was trying to talk about donations. We're talking about donations right now, not wages, so he'll stay on subject.
And by the way, Steven Crowder is the least Christian I've ever seen. He's just a total D-bag through and through.
Yeah, I won't deny that Steve was kind of being a D-bag in this clip right here, just a little with Sargon, and can be on other occasions, but that's kind of ironic coming from an incessant D-bag like you, Sahil.
Then he pivots towards these, you know, this sort of semantical weirdness of, oh, well, he never advocated directly for communism. But what we're trying to say is basically the principles of communism is what he would have supported based on what he said. So here's Matthew 6:24. It says, "No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money." Please, someone explain to me how it's possible for that verse to be there. How can that be there and then you not deduce that this is entirely anti-capitalist, like, or at least Jesus was anti-capitalist? It literally says you will hate the one and love the other.
What you just said is one of the most insanely idiotic things I have ever heard. At no point in your rambling, incoherent response were you even close to anything that could be considered a rational thought. Everyone in this room is now dumber for having listened to it. I award you no points, and may God have mercy on your soul.
That is literally gotta be one of the stupidest interpretations of a Bible verse that I've ever heard in my life. Just because that a person is using money and is for allowing other people to freely use their money for market transactions doesn't mean that they are serving money or loving it or anything like that. A person can still serve, love, and worship God whilst at the same time using money to bargain with other people and be advocating for a system that freely allows people to bargain as they see fit.
Apparently, there are a couple acts in the Bible, and from each according to his ability to each according to his need. It apparently has its roots from the Bible. That's something interesting too. Acts 11:29 says, "Then the disciples, every man according to his ability, determined to send relief unto the brethren which dwelt in Judea." And then Acts 4:35 said, "And laid them down at the apostles' feet, and distribution was made unto every man according as he had need. Holy guacamole, that is pretty crazy. I don't know if Christian conservatives know that exists in the Bible.
I've read at least one of those passages before. So I just read/reread the verses, and in fact the whole passages of both appropriate verses, Acts 4:1 through 5:42 and Acts 11:1 through 30. And I recommend all of you go read the passages yourself. I'm not gonna read them out loud right here, right now, because I like to keep my videos generally down to bite-sized length as much as possible, but go read them yourself when you get the time. What I have to say in response of quoting these two verses, though, is that in the whole two passages, there was no general command being given out to followers of Christ, even to donate. Again, there are other passages where we are commanded to donate, but these two aren't it. Much less are they commands that people have to set up some system in place to coerce/force people into donating or whatever. They're just passages telling stories of followers of Christ. In fact, the passage in Acts chapters 4 and 5 doesn't even make the command to institute communism or socialism. Like, yeah, they set up a hippie commune of sorts of their own, and I would have to analyze this verse better to understand the context as to why they did it, but they did that amongst themselves and voluntarily, and there was no general command that this should be done by all peoples. The same passage also says that some of the followers in that group should not teach or speak of God, yet there are plenty other verses where we are commanded to witness the word of God to other people. So again, no communism being commanded. So for the rest of the video, he essentially goes repeating himself just a little bit more on points that I've already responded to. Then he also goes on responding to Steven Crowder's point about there being no such thing as separation of church and state in the Constitution. And I'm just going to give that to Progressive Voice for right now, because I think that was some severe pedantry at best on Steven's part, as far as there not being such a thing technically as church separation of church and state instituted in the Constitution. But I just want to end off on this one note right here.
Holy guacamole, is this guy embarrassing, man. Steven Crowder's a joke. He somehow managed to get his crap kicked in by Sargon. Oh my god, that's embarrassing.
So I guess I am ultimately sort of going to be defending Steven right here, because there is like a part later on in the clip that Sahil forgot to edit into his video that kind of puts Sargon versus Steven in a bit of a different limelight as far as who owned who in this clip.
I sit with communists like, well, hold on a second. Even if Jesus were like a hippie commune on his own, he never advocated that for a system of government.
No, he didn't.
Because of the end there, he got through his point that of how Jesus did not advocate for a system of government that institutes socialism or communism or anything like that. Sargon agrees, so therefore, yeah, I say that Steven won that exchange, but that's my opinion. But I think what was particularly dumb in this whole video right here was when that Sahil was reading the verse saying essentially that you cannot serve God and money at the same time, and conflating that to be that you should be against capitalism. Like, that was pretty stupid. Just because you're using money to barter doesn't mean that you're serving it. Ridiculous. So that's all I have for this video, folks, and that's all that I have for this year. It has been a fun lineup of videos and response videos, and I'm sure that 2020 will be an exciting one too. Maybe on a different format. On that note, I suggest that you all check out my BitChute account, in case that YouTube does go down under with the COPPA rules and all that. And with all that said, I wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year. I'm the Dark Conservatarian. See y'all later, and God bless.